For the first time since their grisly murders, we're hearing from Rob and Michele Reiner's oldest son, the brother of their accused killer, Nick Reiner. He's now broken his silence and giving us a look into his, quote, living nightmare. This is Scandal, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Gillespie. In December 2025, devastating news dominated headlines around the world. Hollywood power couple Rob Reiner and his wife Michele Singer Reiner were dead, killed inside their own home. And in an incredible twist, it was Reiner's own son, Nick, who's now accused of attacking his parents with a knife inside their Brentwood home. The 32-year-old Nick was arrested hours later in the Exposition Park area of Los Angeles and has since been charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances. Those circumstances being that he allegedly used a knife to commit this grisly double homicide. Since then, there have been new developments in Nick's legal fight, but we haven't heard much from those directly connected to the Reiner family. Their grief was playing out on this international stage, with the family's storied history in TV and the movie-making business making them incredibly well-known. But Jake, the oldest Reiner brother, broke his silence just this month, posting an essay about the unimaginable loss on Substack. He titled it simply Mom and Dad and subtitled it The Center of My Life. Alongside stories about growing up with Rob and Michele, who he described as his, quote, guiding lights, Jake also posted childhood photos with both parents. And just looking at the photos, it's clear to see they really loved each other and really loved their kids. And I want to highlight some of the new insight we've now gotten from that post. And then we'll dig into the latest on Nick's case and his next court date. But let's begin with this. Jake begins his essay by revealing something that really just compounds the grief. On the day his parents were murdered, December 14th, he was actually at a celebration of life for one of his best friends who died a couple of weeks before. So already, this is a really difficult day. But during this time, Jake gets 2 phone calls from his youngest sister, Romy. The first to tell him that their father, Rob, was dead. And then a second phone call that reveals their mother, Michele, is dead as well. According to multiple reports, Rob and Michele were supposed to get massages on December 14th. And when the massage therapist showed up to the home and couldn't get in, she ended up contacting Romy when no one came to the door. Romy then reportedly found her parents butchered inside of their home. About all this, Jake writes, quote, nothing can prepare you for what it feels like to lose both parents instantly at the same time. It's too devastating to comprehend. I still wake up every morning having to convince myself that, no, it's not a dream. This is truly my living nightmare. Jake says he's haunted by the violence of their final moments. He goes on to write, quote, I can't even begin to put myself in my parents' shoes, but one thing I keep coming back to is how frightened they must have been. They were the last people in the world to deserve what happened to them. Insiders have told multiple media outlets that Nick, who, by the way, had reportedly struggled with addiction and mental health issues for most of his life, Nick had reportedly been living in a guest house on the same property in Brentwood, and it's unclear what could have sparked such a brutal assault. We do know that the night before their murders, on Saturday, December 13th, Rob and Michele were invited to Conan O'Brien's annual Christmas party, and they reportedly asked if Nick could tag along. During the party, Nick was allegedly seen acting kind of oddly, making people uncomfortable, including, by the way, SNL alum Bill Hader, who he reportedly had some sort of awkward encounter with. And at that point, it was either that he was asked to leave or Rob and Michele said, okay, let's all leave together. Either way, they all left the party, and the next day, Rob and Michele would then be found dead. Jake Reiner's essay continues and says, quote, every day since then has been horrendous. Every meeting we take, every person we talk to, every tear we shed, every moment we make is connected to our parents being murdered. In the middle of trying to process the most devastating moment of your life, the world demands meetings, paperwork, decisions, and explanations, as if documentation must come before mourning. Jake also addressed the fact that growing up among Hollywood royalty made his childhood a bit different from most people's, but no matter who they were to everyone else, they were his mom and his dad, the 2 people he was closest to on earth. He says, quote, it's not lost on me that I was able to have these incredible experiences that most people don't get to have because of who my parents were. but I would trade every Dodger game, every Broadway show, every vacation if I could just spend one more hour talking to them and to say goodbye. Jake closed out his essay by saying, "My goal in writing this piece is to offer some insight, not only to what I lost, but also to celebrate what my parents meant to me." A lot of people have said to me, "I don't even know what to say." And I don't blame them. If I were in the middle of this storm, I wouldn't know what to say either. It's too specific, too dark. We lost more than half of our family that night in the most violent way imaginable. Sure, any loss of a parent is devastating, but nothing compares to losing both of them at the same time. And on top of that, having your brother be at the center of it. It's almost too impossible to process. I understand that people have questions about what happened. Some of those answers will come in time, but some parts of this belong only to our family, and keeping them private is the only way to protect what little remains of something that was taken from us. What the hell do you say to someone who's living through this reality? The truth is, there is nothing to say. I just ask for love and compassion, the same principles my parents lived by. Right now, Jake's younger brother, Nick, is locked up in LA County, facing down the possibility of life in prison or even the death penalty if he's convicted of double murder, though for now, there is a moratorium on capital punishment in California. And while Jake doesn't seem to directly address his brother's arrest and the charges in this essay, there are rumors floating around that Jake and Romy have completely cut off their brother and cut him out of their lives. We first told you earlier this month about an insider who spoke to Radar Online about an alleged tell-all book that Nick reportedly wants to write. That insider told the outlet, quote, "Reiner wants to lift the lid on his parents' sordid secrets he was exposed to as a privileged Hollywood kid and offer his side of the story, detailing why his parents were butchered in their own bed." The same source said, quote, "He wants to name as many names and cause as much embarrassment as he possibly can." And when it comes to his siblings, the source reportedly said, quote, "To the surviving family members, he's Satan incarnate. They'll spend the rest of their lives trying to recover from the trauma and horrific grief that he's inflicted. And now the notion that he'll be piling on the agony with this depraved tell-all is going to make their pain and suffering even worse." When we last saw Nick, he was looking gaunt with a shaved head and wearing a prison uniform at his arraignment back in February. His public defender entered a not guilty plea for him at that hearing.
On behalf of Mr. Reiner, do you waive full reading of the complaint, advisement of rights, including armed forces and veterans' rights, enter a plea of not guilty, denying any and all special allegations, enhancements, and priors?
Yes, Your Honor.
A plea of not guilty is entered on behalf of Mr. Reiner.
The judge also confirmed with Nick that he was okay with delaying his preliminary hearing, which usually happens pretty soon after the arraignment.
Mr. Reiner, you are entitled to a speedy preliminary hearing. That's a preliminary hearing within 10 court days and 60 calendar days of your arraignment. Your arraignment is today. Do you understand, waive, and give up those rights so that your matter may be continued to April 29th, 2026 as 0 of 30 calendar days, with the understanding that your preliminary hearing may commence within 30 calendar days of April 29th? And does counsel join in that waiver?
I do.
The court finds that Mr. Reiner has made a knowing and intelligent waiver of his right to a speedy preliminary hearing within 10 court days and 60 calendar days, and that his counsel of record joins in that waiver. Defendant agrees that the next court date of April 29th, 2026 is a 0 of 30 calendar days. The matter is assigned to, for all purposes, by the supervising judge of the criminal master calendar. The matter is assigned to, for all purposes, to Judge Sam Oda in Department 108. Counsel reserve on bail?
Yes, Your Honor.
It's bail set at no bail.
Earlier in the case, Nick had a high-profile attorney representing him, Alan Jackson. Jackson is the acclaimed criminal defense attorney who represented Karen Reed in her trial in Massachusetts when she was acquitted of murdering her police officer boyfriend. But not long after taking on the Reiner case, Jackson unexpectedly withdrew as Nick's counsel, but he did tell reporters outside the courtroom that Nick is not guilty of murder.
This morning, I had to withdraw as Nick Reiner's counsel. Circumstances beyond our control, but more importantly, circumstances beyond Nick's control, have dictated that, sadly, it's made it impossible for us to continue our representation of Nick. I'm legally and I'm ethically prohibited from explaining all the reasons why. I know that's a question on everybody's mind. We expect the public defender to step in. They've already been appointed and very capably protect Nick Reiner's interests as he moves forward through the system. But be clear, be very, very clear about this. My team and I remain deeply, deeply committed to Nick Reiner and to his best interests. In fact, we know, we're not just convinced, we know that the legal process will reveal the true facts of the circumstances surrounding this case, Nick's case. You know, a lot's been printed of late, over the last 3 weeks. A lot has been printed about Nick, printed about his family, printed about the circumstances. Speculation is in print. On December 15th, in the early morning hours, I was in New York at the time, and I got a call. Me and my team, we dropped everything. And for the last 3 weeks, we have devoted literally every waking hour to protecting Nick and his interests. We've investigated this matter top to bottom, back to front. What we've learned, and you can take this to the bank, is that pursuant to the laws of this state, pursuant to the law in California, Nick Reiner is not guilty of murder. Print that. Print that. We wish him the very, very best moving forward. And that's all I have today.
And we'll talk about all of that a little bit more in the hearing. But first, I want to talk about the preliminary hearing because we expect a date for that to be set just this week. And during this prelim, the court will decide whether there's enough evidence to move forward to a trial. So we can expect prosecutors to lay out at least some of their evidence against Nick at that point. Well, in the meantime, I want to talk to an expert about all of this, where the case stands now and what we learned from Jake Reiner's essay. So let's bring on our guest for today. It's a friend of the show, former federal prosecutor Nima Rahmani. Nima, as always, great to see you. Thank you for coming on Scandal. And let's start with this new bombshell essay written by Jake Reiner himself. I mean, what are your thoughts about it?
Sierra, thanks for having me as always. I mean, obviously, what a tragic case. And he talks about it in his essay. Imagine losing not one, but both of your parents at the same time in this horrific, gruesome murder, being stabbed to death in your own bedroom. And of course, with your brother being the suspect in the case, who's likely going to be convicted and spend the rest of his life in prison. Really, in the blink of an eye, your family just fell apart entirely. So my heart goes out to Jake, his sister. I can't imagine what he's going through right now.
And, as I was going through in all of my cases, I kind of try to put myself in the perspective of the survivors, the victims. And I was going through this and thinking, recently my dad passed away. I thankfully had my sister to, mourn with me. And I was putting myself in the place of Jake Reiner thinking, well, what if my sister, my sibling, was the one who was accused of killing my parent? And that's what's happening here. I mean, it's something that none of us, thankfully, have had to grapple with, but just a really shocking and devastating thing. And one of the things he mentioned, by the way, in the essay is that a lot of us still have questions and some will be answered. What are your thoughts about that? I mean, as the court hearings proceed, if we were to head to trial, a prelim is kind of on the horizon. Is that when more of our questions might be answered?
I think so. I think the big question everyone is asking, why, right? There's reports of an argument the night before at Conan O'Brien's Christmas party. Did it have to do with that? Was this something that was lingering for weeks, months, maybe even longer, right? What would cause someone to kill their parents? Is it just a psychotic episode, a mental health issue? Was there something going on, right? I think the only kind of real case that is similar, obviously, here in LA, and it's been a while, is the Menendez brothers, right? What could cause someone to want to kill their parents? And, obviously in that case, there are a lot of people who, watch the Netflix series Monsters or some of the other coverage of that case, and they think it was because of Jose's sexual abuse. And I'm not in any way suggesting that Rob Reiner was abusive, and obviously there are people who are watching who believe that it was just, for financial gain. And these were two spoiled Beverly Hills kids. I have friends, I'm sitting here in LA that went to high school with them, so that knew them well. So I think a lot more information is going to come out at trial as to why Nick Reiner did this. Certainly not a legal excuse, right? It's not going to be a defense in the case, but I think that's probably the question that really everyone is asking. What could cause someone to kill their parents?
And I mean, just generally, a normal person, if they're accused of killing their parents, we're going to cover it on Law and Crime, right? That unto itself is a horrific thing to be accused of. But then when you add the layers of it being Rob Reiner and Michele Singer Reiner, beloved philanthropists, I mean, the movies and TV shows, she was a photographer and a producer. These were very beloved, well-liked people. So to have that, it kind of adds to everyone's question mark of why, what is the motive? And you mentioned, okay, it might not be a defense, but maybe an explanation. However, he has to have some sort of defense. So, I mean, what sort of route could they even take? I know that he has a history with, addiction, whether it's being, alcoholism or drug abuse, things like that. Is that the route maybe his defense might take?
No question. I definitely want to talk about the defenses, but you're absolutely right, Sierra. And I could tell you that obviously I've been on Scandal a lot, just Law and Crime in general. And obviously that's the true crime genre. But the reason this case is going to be so big is really, I call it the triple whammy. So I do a lot of TV and I talk to a lot of reporters and producers, and they primarily fall in three categories. And this case hits all three. The first is the true crime, obviously, right? Someone killing their own parents. That's a case that we would cover. Obviously, there's the entertainment factor, right? People love celebrities and they follow celebrity cases, even if it's not true crime, any type of legal dispute involving celebrities. And the third type of case I cover a lot is politics. And, Rob Reiner was very involved politically. And there are folks who have strong views of him because of that. So when you have true crime, entertainment, and politics all intersect, I think this will be the biggest trial probably since OJ here in LA. I think it'll be up there maybe with Johnny Depp and Amber Heard in terms of coverage. And the reason I say trial, Sierra, is this case will almost certainly go to trial. And the reason it's going to go to trial is if you're the district attorney, Nathan Hochman, you can't offer any type of discount in this case, right? This is a life without the possibility of parole case. So if you're the defense here, you're going to push this case all the way to trial. Now, I know people are watching, they're saying, well, there's the theoretical possibility of the death penalty. Now, what I would say is there hasn't been an execution in California in 20 years. It's not a realistic possibility where you have a Brian Koberger situation where someone is going to plead guilty, accept a life sentence in prison to avoid being sentenced to death and be on death row. But I know I've been talking and I didn't answer your question. I am going to answer that question. I think you may see a not guilty by reason of insanity type defense. For the short period of time when Alan Jackson was on the case, he's of course the celebrity lawyer who, he's here in Los Angeles. He represented Karen Reed. You started to see articles, and I'm not saying that they were planted, but there's the courtroom and there's the court of public opinion. And the very good lawyers who handle celebrity cases, they know how to place those arguments in the media. They started talking about his mental health issues and changes to his medication. So it seems to me that is likely going to be the defense here. But that's a very difficult defense here. Not guilty by reason of insanity requires the defense to prove, the burden's on them to show that because of a mental disease or defect, that the defendant doesn't understand the nature and consequences of his actions. Basically, doesn't know right from wrong. If you're coherent enough to have an argument with your parents the night before at a holiday party, and you can flee and go to a Santa Monica hotel and clean up and wash off all that blood, that doesn't strike me as someone who's legally insane, but I don't think it's going to stop the defense from trying to put forth that theory.
I mean, he has the right to a defense. If that's the best that they have, it makes sense that they would kind of go that route. However, I agree. I mean, I think it's going to be an uphill battle if that's the way that they go. And to your point, Nima, I mean, there's so many different avenues we could talk about in this case, whether it's the death penalty. You talked about Conan O'Brien's party. Is it possible we'll see Bill Hader take the stand? Jane Fonda was there. I mean, the celebrity of it all. But you also talked about Alan Jackson. And this is something I want to discuss too, because I know a lot of our viewers of course, followed the Karen Reed trials, plural, that Alan Jackson kind of was, the major heavyweight there. I know that he also represented Kevin Spacey, who eventually was acquitted. Here in Massachusetts, all of the charges there were dropped. So, he is a heavy hitter. Of course, Nick Reiner is going to take him on, but now he's stepped away from the case. And we don't have 100% confirmation as to why he stepped away. However, he did speak to my coworker, I know you've talked to him, Jesse Weber, many times, and it kind of alluded to it might have been a money situation. And this leads into my next question. The idea that maybe the Reiner siblings, Romy and Jake, have completely cut off Nick Reiner, meaning he has no access to the Reiner fortune, so to speak, to, perpetuate his defense or pay for things like that. What are your thoughts about his bank account and all of that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And again, just speculation, but I think it was about money as well. Because look, this is going to be a very expensive case to defend, right? It's going to go into the 7-figure range, $1 million by the time it's all said and done. It's not just Jackson, any associates, experts. It is expensive. And if you take on this case, this isn't a case that you're going to plead out. This is a case that you're going to push all the way to trial for the reasons that we've talked about. So California obviously has slayer statutes. So if you kill your parents, you are disinherited. Doesn't matter if it's a will, trust, you're the beneficiary of some other bank account or other legal instrument, you're out. So then all of a sudden, like you said, the question is, if that money is going to Jake, and I assume that there's significant money, Jake and Romy, right? The siblings, well, what are they going to do? Are they going to pay for their brother's legal defense? Or is he going to be on his own? So I don't know what their decision is. Certainly Jake didn't talk about it in his essay. But the fact that we now have a public defender leads me to believe that Nick Reiner doesn't have significant sums of money. And even if he had money before these murders, I don't think that it would be a significant amount. He's living in his parents' guest house, right? He's not living on his own. He has this pretty well documented drug problem, or at least he had. I would be surprised if, Rob and Michele Reiner were giving their son significant sums of money if they really believed that he did have a drug problem.
And you're right. I mean, some of the accusations that we've seen are that they had this heated blowout in the wake of Conan O'Brien's Christmas party because maybe perhaps he'd fallen off the wagon. Maybe there are some reports that Rob and Michele were saying, you know what, Nick, we would love if you could go back to rehab, if you could seek treatment. So, I mean, hopefully these are some answers that we'll have. But you also mentioned the Slayer statute, and I kind of wanted to talk about this in the Son of Sam law. So explain this to me. There have been some rumors that Nick Reiner from behind bars, because right now he's in jail there in LA County, that he's writing a quote unquote tell-all book where he wants to name names and, blow the lid off of these Hollywood conspiracies. But can he make any money for that if he's convicted? I mean, right now he is innocent until proven guilty. He has not been convicted, but he is up against some pretty serious charges. So how does all of that work?
Yeah, this is a great question, Sierra. And a lot of people don't know this. It's state specific. So obviously, we've talked about Rex Heuermann, right? And what his wife's doing, the Long Island serial killer. So the Slayer statutes are on the books in California. You can't inherit if you kill your parents. But the Son of Sam laws have been more or less struck down as violating the First Amendment. So in California, believe it or not, Nick Reiner may be able to profit from telling his story in a way that he might not be able to in some other states. And obviously, again, as we've talked about, it's going to be the biggest story. And imagine the trial, like you said, Conan O'Brien, Hader, Fonda, Larry David. I mean, there's a lot of people who are going to be potential witnesses in this case. It's going to be the who's who. Biggest trial, certainly, in recent memory here in Los Angeles. It is going to be a circus. And I think those, follow through documentaries, obviously, are going to be big. I would expect them on every major network because it's such a huge story.
I mean, it makes sense, right? Because so many of us who don't live in LA, or even those of us who do, are interested in what it's like to live that kind of lifestyle. There's a reason that the E! Network exists, or Us Weekly, so that people from all over the world were interested in what this type of life is. And to your point, even if there isn't true crime associated, but when there is true crime, we all want to know. Some of the reports were saying that Billy Crystal was one of the first people to the scene because, of course, he was best friends with Rob Reiner, grew up, with the kids. So to see if that's a possibility of Billy Crystal taking the stand and talking about finding all, like, just absolutely crazy. But something else you mentioned too, if Nick Reiner is actually writing this from behind bars right now, like if he's actually writing this tell-all book, he could make money off of it, as you said. But is it possible if he's, writing in a notebook, whatever it may be right now, that these, I guess, journals or notebook entries could be used at trial as exhibits?
They can. Obviously, anything he says or writes can be used against him. So, if I were advising him and this is something he wants to do and he legally can do it under California Son of Sam laws, I would say, we're not going to do anything until this trial is over, right? Because the last thing you want is a statement you give to a reporter or a producer or something you write to be used against you. In any interview, if there is an interview, I would make sure that I was there. I probably wouldn't approve or authorize any interviews in this case, especially if your argument is legal insanity, right? If you start looking at the kind of defenses in a murder case, right? And we cover a lot of them here on Scandal, but they generally fall into, one of 3 or 4 categories, right? The first is it wasn't me. And then it's going to be very hard for Nick Reiner to argue that it wasn't him. I assume there's going to be tons of DNA, blood, video, fingerprint evidence, you name it. The forensics are going to be there, probably video as well. The second is that I didn't intend to do it. You might see some sort of manslaughter type argument, kind of heat of passion. It's very difficult. Again, if you get an argument the night before, you go back, you grab a knife to argue that it's manslaughter. Actually, this was argued in the Nipsey Hussle case. That it wasn't intentional first-degree murder, that it was manslaughter because of some fighting words. But again, the defendant in that case went back to his car to get a weapon and came back, and that's too much time for a heat of passion. The third is self-defense, right? And obviously, we know that Rob and Michele Reiner are a lot older, especially Michele. I can't imagine any viable self-defense argument. And the last is sort of negating that intent, not guilty by reason of insanity, right? I think they got to probably fall into that last bucket. So if you have your client, giving interviews to Oprah or Barbara Walters or whatever the case may be, it's probably not someone that's going to be legally insane. I think it's going to hurt that defense. So I would be very surprised if we see anything like that.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, I would love to interview him here on Scandal. I'd love to talk to him. But if I was his defense attorney, I'd be saying stay away from all of that until we're finished with the trial and everything. And I guess that leads into my last question for you, Nima. I feel like we're still so early on in all of this. I have to remind myself we haven't even had a prelim yet. But that's kind of on the horizon, something that we're looking ahead to that should be decided on, I think, as early as this week, a date for the prelim. So what are your hypotheses for all of that? And what does that really entail?
I think we're going to see this case kicked out. Obviously, we have another case that's happening right now in LA, big case, the David Celeste Rivas case, where the defense is not waiving time and is insisting on an immediate prelim. That's going to happen soon unless something changes by the time this airs. But typically for these high profile murder cases, and we're seeing it in Tyler Robinson, right? What the defense wants to do is get all the discovery, review it, and have time to prepare their case for prelim. So I would be very, very surprised here if this case goes to trial anytime before 2027. I know it's not what people want to hear, but it's the defense's right to a speedy trial. This is a life without the possibility of parole case. Judges are usually going to give the defense the time they need to prepare. And a case like this, you got to make sure you have your experts, you've reviewed all the meds, all the drugs and everything. So I don't think we're going to be going to trial anytime soon. And certainly, I don't think we even have a prelim date confirmed on the books yet. So maybe we'll get that as early as this week. We'll see.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, Nima, because this is huge charges that are wagered against him. And you're right. I mean, maybe death penalty possibility, not super likely here, especially based on the moratorium in California there. But either way, life in prison without parole, that's huge. The defense is going to want to make sure that they have all their ducks in the row. And the same for the prosecution, too, because as you pointed out, the world is watching. So we're just going to have to wait and see what happens. Nima Rahmani, thank you for coming on Scandal with us today. And I'm sure we'll have you back on again soon.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Sierra. Glad to be back. And I'm sure we're going to be talking about this case for quite some time.
And that's where today's episode of Scandal leaves us for now. If you like what you saw and you want to see more or connect with me on social media, you can find me on places like Instagram at Sierra Gillespie. Thanks for watching today's episode of Scandal. As always, I'm your host, Sierra Gillespie, and I'll see you next time.